Hey, Geordie. Welcome to Project 100, mate.
MB, great to be here.
So we'll declare I do know Jordan, and we've known him for a while now, and he's a good bloke. He's helped me in various situations. That is lose weight or make weight, more importantly. But he, as far as I'm concerned, he's one of the best experts in Australia when it comes to diet, not just for fighters, but just generally speaking. And I just quickly need to go through your qualifications. So, or maybe you tell me, what do you got? What's your undergrad degree?
Undergrad degree is in Bachelor's of Exercise and Nutrition Science.
Yeah,
and then
as in being the science of it.
Yeah, science of exercise, science of nutrition, and then went back and did a Master's of Dietetics study.
Dietetics,
yeah,
which is diet, I guess.
Diet, yeah,
Fancy
word for diet.
And I presume that encompasses nutrition or drags nutrition into it.
Yeah,
as part
you
of
do a lot. Public health nutrition, clinical nutrition, sports nutrition is where I put my focus. But then as part of that, I spent a year on the oncology ward as well. So it was good. So you get a little bit of everything. And then after your master's, you kind of specialize into what you want to do. And for me, that was sports nutrition.
And of course, everybody can hear you're an Aussie, but you do look after a number of UFC fighters and boxers. People don't realize that. I think that's where you started. Did you start off looking after boxers or UFC
started
fighters?
With the UFC, and then the boxers kind of merged in. But it's everyone: boxers, judo, MMA, karate, BJJ,
all martial arts.
Yeah.
And for those of you who can't see, he's right here. He doesn't mind a bit of jiu-jitsu himself, and he's a mad trainer for anyone who follows him. He's either running or he does extreme shit, in my opinion. He's only young, but he's doing extreme shit. Like, I've seen you run in all sorts of weird and wonderful places. What is that deal with you anyway, boy? Why are you doing that extreme stuff?
I always think, MB, it's like there's the science of it, and then there's putting the science into practice. And we did really well in the weight cutting with the fighters because I used to compete and cut weight. And when I finished my master's degree, I remember being in Canada and it was for a jiu-jitsu competition. I had to lose about 25 pounds. And I remember thinking, man, if there's one person who knows how to do this, it's got to be me. I got 2 degrees in this thing. And I had no idea. And I was like going through all the research and looking around, this is 7-8 years ago, and it's come a long way since there. But I'm going, how is it that this is a growing sport? And the UFC, it wasn't where it was today. This was before Conor made the big rise, but it was still big. And I thought, surely there's got to be some things out there. And there just wasn't. And so me going through that process and then understanding it for myself gave me so much more insight. And that's really how we developed our system at TFD to help the Israel Adesanyas, the Alex Volkanovskis. And you're seeing a lot of what we spoke about all those years ago come out in the research now, and the UFC PI using it as common practice. But I learned a lot of that by being able to not only just understand the science and the physiology, but put it into practice, into context with this, which is really important. And that's why, I guess, not that we've solved the weight cutting issue, but I feel like we've come leaps and bounds and we've created a system where it's a lot safer for the fighters. The next thing that was really interesting for me, because that sits at the edge of, I'd say, physiology. You've seen a weight cut, you've done a weight cut. Yep. It's very extreme. But when you look at ultra endurance running or any ultra endurance activity, you look at guys like David Goggins who've popularized it so much. There's a lot of people getting into it now, but it's the same situation as what fighting was 10 years ago. We don't have a lot of good science around it. We don't really understand it. And when you're out there, it's carnage. People are dropping left, right, and center. People die. People go off. They DNF and go to the hospital. I myself have put myself in the ICU following rules that are in the textbook that should work, but they don't. So it's just another problem. So I guess the extreme nature of it is me trying to understand this problem that I'm trying to fix in these other sports.
So it's interesting. It is, and I don't want to, maybe this word is the wrong word, but it sort of does describe it. Have you built up a textbook in your own mind? You probably even put it in writing, but of manipulation of our bodies to achieve an outcome, either cutting weight or maybe even allowing you to run an ultramarathon. That is, in other words, putting probably enough weight on to be able to do that. Have you spent your life, the last 8-9 years, working out ways to manipulate our system?
Yeah, figuring out how fueling works within the body and then how our body moves fluid throughout the body in 2 pretty extreme situations.
Fluid as in hydration.
Fluid as in hydration, because it's you look at a lot of sports and just every day, that hydration factor probably doesn't come into it until, and we think right now in the research, till say you lose 5 liters of fluid. That's when things really start changing. And you think like you go for your morning run and you might sweat a lot, even in the summer, but you're probably only losing 1 liter, 2 liters max. And what situation are you losing more than 5 liters? Probably not if you're running a half marathon, probably not even in a jiu-jitsu if we're wearing our gis, it's really hot. You're still not going to be losing 5 liters. It's in these extreme environments with the weight cutting where fighters are purposely sweating down. And then in the ultra endurance where we're running for 8, 12, 16, 24, 30, 36. We've got a race over in Arizona, which will be 72 hours long.
What?
So yeah, so how do we manage that in these extreme environments? It's tough to research because how do you convince people to come into a lab and say, hey, MB, jump on a treadmill, let me stick a thermometer up your butt and let me see what happens for the next 48 hours. You're going to go, get stuff, mate. No way.
I'm probably mad enough to try something like that, but that would be fun. But so, and I think what you're saying to me, because one of the things I remember, Jordan, is that, and by the way, I introduced you to Jeff Finneck. Jeff Finneck, like great trainer, 4-time world champion, 4 different divisions, the only Australian ever done it, Hall of Famer in the WBC Hall of Famer, blah, blah, blah. Actually learned so much from you in terms of weight cut for a couple of these fighters scientifically, and it was about measurement. Well, you can't measure, you can't manage. So if you're trying to measure a weight cut or a weight outcome, you've got to be able to measure it. So maybe just, and I know we're not just going to talk about fighters today, but just tell me how you start off. Let's say someone has to lose 10 kilos to make weight. Let's start off. What's the first measurement you do?
Yeah. And I guess it does apply even if you wanted to lose 10 kilos and you're not a fighter, right?
Totally.
Yeah. And like you said, if you can't measure it, how do you manage it? And the first thing we do, if we're trying to manipulate your body composition, we need to know what body composition you're playing with. So we send the guys to go get a DEXA scan, which is a really cool test where you just lay down in the bed and puts a little over the top of you, and then it comes back, it tells us what your fat-free mass is and then what your fat mass is. So we can have
your muscle.
Your muscle within your fat-free mass. So,
fat-free mass. That's
yeah. So you've got your fat-free mass, which is all your muscle and joints and everything else, and then your fat mass, which is your subcutaneous and your visceral fat. So we can look at that subcutaneous fat and go, MB, okay, you're telling me you want to lose 5 kilos, but do you physically have 5 kilos to lose? And what does that look like? Because it's all well and good to just eat a can of tuna every day, but what's the consequences of losing that 5 kilos?
Well, what are the consequences? So let's say, for example, I'm 85, I want to make 75, I want to fight middleweight, or super middleweight. I want to get down to 74, 75, whatever the case may be. I need to lose 10 kilos. But you put me on a DEXA and it turns out my DEXA that I'm only 12% body fat. In other words, I got 12% of 80 is 10% is 8, another 2 is like 10 kilos of fat.
We still use you as the reference for our masters athletes. Whenever we get people coming in for DEXAs and they go, I can't get that lean. I go, hey.
You can.
Yes, you can.
Well, I did. But and so on that though, when's it become dangerous? So, because I remember you saying to me, I don't really want, at my age, at that time, you said, I don't want you said to me, I don't want you really getting down below 10%. Mm-hmm. 10% fat relative to the rest of your body. When does it get dangerous? Because I see some guys are so cut, like older guys, but they're obviously just sort of completely drained themselves. You see bodybuilders do it, but they wouldn't be able to do a push-up.
No.
Like, I'm serious. Like, is that right? Because they're doing it for looks, but outside of that is dangerous, or it's sort of non-performative. You can't perform.
Yeah.
So when does it start to get dangerous in your experience?
So if we're talking about athletes, if we use the fighters, for example, if I get a fighter and they're saying, hey, I've got to lose 10 kilos, I'm 8 weeks out, I'm very, very happy if I see them between 15 to 17% body fat. And if you look at someone at 15% or, up to 17%, you probably don't look at that person and go, oh, wow, that's a completely shredded athlete.
Yeah.
You'd be looking at it going, oh, he's got some room to play with here. And I go, yeah, exactly. But we need that. If I'm going to diet him down for 8 weeks and we're going to lose, and a good gauge that we use is say 1% of your body weight per week loss is very healthy. Your body can sustainably do that. And
not in water though.
No, in body fat. So if you're going to put yourself in a calorie deficit, which you need to do to mobilize your fat stores to get it out of that subcutaneous fat for your body to go, hey, MB, I need some energy. Where am I going to get it from? Your stores. You can put yourself in enough of a deficit, 1% per week, we seem to think right now that's pretty sustainable. I see that in my practice. Whether you're a fighter, you're just an everyday person, everyday gym goer, 1% is pretty good. But we need that 1%. So if we think, hey, over the next 8 weeks, this guy's going to fight, we've got 7 weeks of dieting, that's still 7% of their body weight we've got to lose. So if he's starting at 17%, we're coming all the way down to 10% there. And that is pretty cut up. That's a pretty good shape. And then from there, then we're doing the water manipulation. But I'd never get those guys lower than 10%. And the reason for that is fat is really important. We talk about it a lot and we demonize it because there's so much weight loss talk and, oh my God, we look at the extremes on the other end and go, fat's really bad. But it is serving a really important role in your body. It's the backbone for all your hormones. It's such an important thing in your body. So you can't get too low. And like you said, you see these bodybuilders, they're going down to 2-3%. But then you also see their testosterone's going down. You see the thyroid hormones going down, all these other markers. And we see that with the fighters. If we get someone coming in and they are quite lean and we're going, man, they must be going to a fair bit of effort to be maintaining that type of lean physique outside of camp, it often correlates with their biomarkers being reduced. And as a practitioner for me, where I'm going, hey, not only do I need peak performance from you, I need peak health to be able to do that. That's not healthy. So we need to bring your body fat up so we have the runway for you to land so we can cut down during this fight camp to get to this point, but I can't have you that much leaner. So you do see a lot of our top level fighters outside of camp walking anywhere between 14 to 16%. And when it comes to females, it's even higher. I always say to our females, us males are very simple creatures. We're very, very simple creatures. You have to continue the human race. So there's a lot more things going on in your body that's a lot more important. That you're also a lot more sensitive to the effects of being in these calorie deficits. For our female athletes, anywhere from 14 all the way up to 18, even 20%. And if you look at someone at that body composition, you're probably not necessarily going, oh, they're super athletic. But it's necessary for them to be operating peak performance and then operating in peak health. So it is important that you understand that, hey, not necessarily being really, really ridiculously shredded is always better.
So measure DEXA. And let's say you're in the right range. Let's say you're 20 above or whatever. That gives there's room to move, and that's a really important point in terms of just general health. But there's also room to move, but you don't want to go too far. And you're really setting yourself a limit. You don't want to be doing it for 50 weeks. You want to be able to do it for 8 weeks, 12 weeks, whatever the case may be, the prep period. And you don't have to be doing it for a fight. It could be you've got a wedding coming up or whatever the case may be. Or you just want to get a new starting point. You just want to get yourself to a point. You can measure that. And that informs you how much room you have to move in terms of calorie deficit.
Mm-hmm.
But how do you work out calorie deficit? So everyone's different. People get on onto the internet and they look up calories and they say, well, there's, in an egg, there's so many calories, or in a steak, there's so many calories and there's so much protein and blah, blah, blah. Like, it's a bit confusing. So what do you do in terms of measurement, though, in a scientific sense, around what does calorie deficit mean for Mark?
Yeah, 2 ways we need to establish your baseline calories. So we can do that either we send you to a fancy lab, you can breathe into a tube, and that measures literally the oxygen and carbon dioxide that you're breathing. That can give us a good idea of how your body's metabolizing fuel sources at rest.
At rest.
And that can give us a very accurate, for that situation, that environment, very accurate amount of what your at rest calories are.
So you can get that. A lot of the DEXA places have this.
Yeah, it's called a resting metabolic rate. And we'll use it a lot with our athletes. For the everyday person, though, probably not going to have access to it.
Majority, I've done it. It's not that expensive. I did one last year, actually. It's not that expensive. I went to those guys, Measure Up. I think you sent me there before.
Yeah.
You've got to be careful, just by the way, on the DEXA, just on measurement, there's calibrations. So I remember once we did one on a junction with you. Then I went and did another one down the road, Double Bay. I won't say where it was going. And they were different. And like, it was literally hardly any time difference between the two. And one was saying I was fatter than the other one. And in the end, you sent me to Measure Up. And it's important to find a good one. And I'm not here just to promote Measure Up. They have been on my podcast, but I'm not here to promote the Measure Up guys. But calibration is important. And you did talk about the different calibration processes in relation to the machinery. And it's not a big deal, but it takes 5 minutes.
Yeah.
The DEXA and the rested metabolic rate takes about 20 minutes or something like that. And you're not doing it, you're just sitting there.
Yeah.
But these give you baselines.
Yeah.
Baselines. Well, I don't know why we don't do baselines, but anyway, we've got everyone should do baselines, but it's baseline. It's not that expensive. And mine, last one I did late last year was like 2,100, I think, calories at rest. That means my body is chewing up quite a bit of calories just sitting there, assuming I do nothing. What do you do after that? So you've got to make some assumptions after that. How do you make assumptions about how many more calories I'm going to burn going to work or doing a training session?
Yeah, because you're not just sitting around.
No, I'm not going to sit around. I'm training. I'm trying to work out. So how do you work out the assumptions?
So we have this whole system which are called metabolic equivalents, which some scientists went down and they looked at all these different sets of data and said, how do we normalize all this data and go, how do we predict, say for Mark, if he's doing this activity for this long, how many calories? And they came up with this concept of metabolic equivalents, and they simplified it down to going, hey, if you're mildly active, we're going to multiply that resting metabolic rate by 1.2. If you're moderately active, it could be 1.5, et cetera, and so on and so forth. I had this very interesting discussion with Andy Galpin, and we said,
Dr. Andy Galpin,
one of the highest ranked performance physiologists in the world. And we both said to each other, how do you go about this? And we went, I bet everyone's sitting on the other side of this camera thinking there's going to be a really scientific answer. And we go, you know what we do? We get that RMR, which is, you need to get that pretty accurate. And then I look at what you're doing, MB. I go, okay, MB's training twice a day. He's probably sitting around here. And then all you have to do is make a very, very calculated guesstimate. And the only way you're going to ever know if you've got that right is if the goal is weight loss, is if you're consistent with that 2-3 weeks, does your weight come down in a way that we predict it to? And that might seem to people, oh, it's really simple. And you go, yeah, but it's really complicated to get that accurate.
Especially per individual.
Per individual. And this is where, say, I'm very lucky because we've worked with thousands and thousands of athletes that do very similar activities. So I can look at them and go, okay, MB, you're showing me that you're at 13% body fat. You've got this much lean mass. Your RMR's coming out here. You're doing this type of training. I'm pretty confident that if we put you in X amount of a deficit, say 15%, and you're having this many calories, I'm going to see X amount weight loss each week. And then we can set up your weight descent protocol. And then depending, you go, hey, Geordie, I'm 400 grams off. I'm 400 grams heavier. I go, okay, we might have overshot it. That's where we adjust it. And that's where I think it trips up a lot of people because they just want this hard and fast answer. They want this hard and fast. Can I go to Google, put it in a calorie calculator?
Give me a diet.
Give me the plan. And then you can do that, but the art meets science in the adjustments. And then really that's what we're doing as practitioners. The only reason we get it right more often than not is because we've done it with thousands of people. So for that specific population, we understand, okay, I'm pretty certain that if I put them on this amount of calories, we're going to lose this much weight.
Okay, so I know my calories that I need to, or I can make a very good statistical assumption in relation to my calories based on metabolic rate test, rested. I know what my DEXA is, so I know how much room I've got to move or don't have to move. So I can make a sensible, sustainable adjustment. I speak to you and you tell me, mate, let's make these assumptions about your activity level. And you tell me, Mark, 3,000 calories is all you need to be able to do everything. So we're going to put you in a slight deficit. And then I say, well, how do I do that? Like food, do I have to food prep? I know you can advise people to go to places who make the food for you, which is probably the best way to do it, the safest way to do it, because, you've got professionals making the food. You just buy it, gets delivered. I've been through the process. Some of them are better than others in terms of taste profiles, but they're all personal. Everybody has a different view on this stuff. You do that. The person gets to the weight, okay? They're looking pretty lean. They're feeling good. They've been training. Let's say we're not a fighter. Then what happens, mate? How do I maintain? So what happens after that? Like just a normal person, they just want to lose weight. They've been eating shit all Christmas, having drinks, blah, blah, blah. They want to clean themselves out by the end of February. They want to kick off their work here really hard. They want to live longer, but less dangerous fat, etc. How do they maintain it then? Does it get a bit tricky after that?
By being very patient. And that's something that people don't like to hear. And this comes back to when we're talking about, say, the 1% weight loss per week. If I sat down and said, hey, MB, it's going to take you 8 weeks to get to this weight, you'd go mentally, okay, 8 weeks, I could probably do that.
So that's finite. So I'm okay with that.
It's finite. But what if I said, hey, MB, actually, this is going to take you 104 weeks? Yeah. You'd go, oh my God, that's pretty long. But in reality, it's going to be a year on year thing. And that's where a lot of people trip up with this diet. And we're talking about body fat and everything. And if you see, say for the everyday person, if I'm assessing a DEXA, I like to see anywhere between 12 and 14% walk around weight. But for you to be able to diet down from say 20% body weight to get to that as your walk around is going to take a very, very long time. And the reason for that is you have to do it very slowly, because the biggest problem that we see with dieting is crash dieting, because it's not hard to lose weight. It's hard to keep weight off.
That's the whole point.
That's the whole point. And you can just eat a can of tuna for a couple of weeks and you'll lose a lot of weight. But the thing that you're doing is you're taking all these calories out of your system and you haven't given your body time to readjust and reequilibrate to what's going on in your body. To go, okay, we're slowly mobilizing these fat stores. It's coming off. I'm going to hormonally adjust. I'm going to, shift my metabolism a little bit up here. Everything's going to change nice and slow. All you've done is taken all these calories out and then your body's going, oh crap. We're in famine mode. And it's not that you go in starvation mode. Your body will definitely lose weight. You'll 100% lose. If you send someone out into the desert with just a few gallons of water and no food, everyone's going to lose weight. But that person will come back. What's the first thing they're going to do? You put them in front of a buffet. All those signals in their brain are just going to go eat. And we see this with data with fighters because it's a very interesting experiment where fighters will very, very much do this yo-yo type behavior. And if you do a fight camp where you cut weight way too aggressively and you go above that 1%, what you tend to see afterwards is what we call rebound hyperphagia, which essentially says, I see food, I'm going to eat it. And there's even case study reports where researchers at Liverpool John Moores have looked at a Taekwondo athlete. They tracked everything and they went, okay, this guy's dropping weight down here and we're going to assess what happens after he finishes his competition. He went off to Europeans. He won the competition. And then there was even reports from him going, hey, you know what? There were times that I was just standing there at my cupboard with a half-eaten Mars bar in my hand, but I don't really remember getting here because his body's seeking out those calories because he was so aggressive with how he went with his descent. And what often happens is they rebound. So it's rebound, come back up, hyperphagia, eat a lot, come back up to a weight that's often heavier than where they started. Yeah. And you see this a lot with crash dieting, and your body composition changes because then you're putting on the calories into your body a lot faster and you're putting on body fat. So you're probably changing your composition where you've lost muscle in that aggressive descent. So you've lost your metabolic machinery in your muscle, but then you're putting in 100,000 calories over the course of a week or two. And now your body's storing that away as fat. By the time you get back to the weight you started at, you've got more body fat and less muscle.
I'm someone who's done that.
Yeah. And you see this a lot with fighters, and it's a lot of the rationale to why we see, okay, why is it that boxers or MMA fighters over time have to go up a weight class as they get older?
Yeah.
Do they damage their metabolism? And it's not necessarily that they're damaging their metabolism per se, but it's they're going through these cyclic phases of rebound hyperphagia where all they're doing is going too aggressive in that initial deficit. They're not giving their body the time to adjust. Whereas if the everyday person, if we sit there and you go, Geordie, I want to lose 10 kilos. I go, MB, let's spend a year doing it then. So we can just really dwindle that number down. Yeah, it'll be hard. It'll take a lot longer. But what that will allow your body to do is preserve that muscle mass, which is very important for you as you get older. And being in that slight deficit, yeah, you'll lose it. You won't lose it as fast. It'll come off, but it'll put you in a position where your body has enough time to adjust. So when you get to the end of it, and say in 2.5 years time, 3 years even, when you've got that 10 kilos off, you can do it and live your normal life. And you don't go, oh, I'm going to go walking around and just thinking about food 24/7. You know what it's like. You've done diets.
But I've done the other thing too, where the night after, in fact, even after the night of when I finished the fight, I've drank beers, and that's not a good thing to do. And because it's I nearly pass out from the alcohol. Which I don't know, 2 beers nearly kills me. But then you're right, I can't wait to eat the next day. I mean, fucking everything I can get my hands on, chocolates, whatever. And then you go back really quickly, right? Really quickly. And then you feel like a piece of shit because you don't train or anything. You think, I've been training hard, I'm not going to train. If you're talking now to an audience that we're talking to, I think what you're saying to us is that you're not fighters. You don't need to lose it in, an 8 week. You don't need to weigh in, 8 week period. You don't need to do a weigh in. And you're definitely not going to act like a fighter post the fight. What we're talking about here is getting some measurements, knowing what we're dealing with, understanding the mathematics around your own body, or at least building up some sensible mathematical structure around your own body, the amount of calories you need, and not necessarily put yourself into deficit, maybe just in maintenance mode. Can we just talk then about, and we're going to do it over a long period of time, so your body learns to adjust itself. Can I just go through some of the myths then? I've been through all these, but don't eat anything white during this period. In other words, in the morning, get my calories out of protein instead of having any toast. And I know, and then I'm not going to do what Jordan says to do before a training session. I'm not going to have porridge with, I'm going to have 30 grams of porridge instead of 60 grams of porridge. And I'm not going to have banana slice on there, and he likes to sprinkle bits and pieces on there and to give me energy. But then I would go and train really hard because I've only had a little bit of porridge. I've had no porridge, and I've had buckwheat or something, some other thing that's more protein based. Trying to lose weight. To be sustainable? How do we do this, mate? Without sort of absolutely beating the shit out of ourselves. Never have a piece of toast. Don't eat an ice cream. Don't eat the chocolates. Well, you used to tell me the best chocolate. I don't know how you work this out, but the best chocolate was to eat this. It sounded like an Israeli name, Mossa.
The one from Aldi.
Yeah, from Aldi.
I feel like we should get a sponsorship. The amount of people I've sent to that chocolate place.
Because you could just get one little piece, you didn't have to eat the whole thing. And when I looked at the calories on the back, there's actually a lot, and it still tastes pretty good. A lot less calories than it before. I can't remember the name of it now, but you can only buy from Aldi. But you deny. Basically, I was denying myself. I can't live that life. Where's the middle ground here?
I think what I do with people as a starting point, so an MB, you were cutting weight. So say I had a client the other week, very successful physiotherapist, very, very smart guy, basically said, look, man, I need to lose some weight. Write me a diet plan. I went, okay, look, I respect you, so I'm going to go through this with you properly.
Scientifically.
And I said, that's 2 steps ahead though. Me writing you a diet plan, it doesn't matter. I can write you the perfect diet plan, but if you don't understand the meaning behind the words on that plan, why you're doing it, why you're having the porridge, why you're putting the bananas, it doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean anything. It doesn't work like that in any other facet of your life. It's not going to work in nutrition. So let's take it 2 steps back. And what I got him to do, I said, man, just for 1 week, download MyFitnessPal. And I'm not all for tracking.
What's it called?
MyFitnessPal. It's a tracking app where you just track every calorie, and that can cause a lot of mental drama, but it's important. It's important for you to understand what's happening in my food environment right now. So we know what we're working with.
Back to measurement and management.
Back to measurement. If we can measure it, we can manage it. So, and what I need you to see is what's going on, and I need you to see it. So what we got him to do, hey man, don't change anything. I'm not going to judge you. I do this with thousands of people. Just write it down, put it in this app, send me it, and we'll go through it. And he pretty much texted me after a few days. He went, oh my God, I know what you mean. He goes, I'm eating so much more. And he goes, it's crazy how this just adds up, these little snacks. And he goes, you know what, always tell me eat more protein. I thought I was eating protein, but I was never measuring it, and I'm not getting nearly as much. And what I'm doing is I'm actually snacking on the bread and everything else
Kit
when
Kats
I'm hungry, and Kit Kats. Yeah. And it's, I used to think I'm getting the small ones, so it doesn't matter. But when you're having 10 of them, geez, that adds up with calories. Or when I'm putting the oil in the pan, when I'm cooking my eggs in the morning, geez, that adds up with a lot of calories. You just become a lot more aware of it. And I think that's the most important thing, because I can write you a diet, but if it's not foods that you're used to eating, it's not foods your family eats, it's not things that are familiar with you, that's in your environment, it doesn't matter. You might stick to it for 8 weeks. You're not going to do it for 8 years. And so getting people to understand, okay, what are you actually doing? And then for this person, we go through and I go, where do you think the issues are? And the thing is with this nutrition, there's a lot of science to it. It can be very complicated. You can get very in the weeds. Most people have a pretty good idea. Most people will probably be able to tell you, I know protein's pretty good for me. Protein equals muscle, pretty good. As we get older, we want to keep as much muscle as possible. Probably need to have a high amount of protein. Carbs, we know. Like carbs, yeah, we go love-hate relationship with them. Do you want them? Do you not want them? If you're going to be doing some type of activity, it's probably a good idea to have them. I always say for carbs, I'm a big advocate. If you're going to eat carbs, use them as the vessel to get your fiber. That's the one thing I say to people.
How do you mean as your fiber?
As your fiber. So like if you're getting brown rice, brown bread, you're getting all this really good carbohydrate source, complex carbohydrates, we call them the starchy carbs, the grainy carbs, they're going to have fiber in there. And fiber is probably the one nutrient that we know, hey, if you have 30 grams plus for a guy, 30 to 40 grams per day over your lifetime, you're going to have pretty good health outcomes. So even if you don't like carbohydrates, I compromise with people and go, hey, all you need to do is eat enough of them to get 30 grams of fiber per day. And then we move down to the fat and we go, okay, well, fat's important. We know we can put numbers on there and go, okay, you still need fat for that hormonal health, everything else that it does. You need to get it, brain health, everything. So we can appreciate that there's some importance. And then all we need to do once we're looking at this data from the MyFitnessPal, I can say, okay, MB, you can appreciate not enough protein, not having enough fiber, and then your fat's probably too high because we're having all these other different sources. We're having, too much ice cream or whatever and bagels and blah, blah, blah. So we get too much refined sugars that's not giving us fiber, too much fat, not enough protein. So how do we fix that? And then I just say basic numbers. And I think that's what people want. They want basic numbers. I go, okay, we want to aim for protein, aim for 2 to 2.5 grams per kilogram per day. So
in my case, that's 180 grams a day.
Yeah, 180 grams.
That's a lot of protein, mate.
And then, you look at it and you go, okay, well, if we come back to your RMR, and let's say 2100, if we go, okay, if there's only 200 grams, if you work out the calories, that's only 800 calories worth of protein from you.
Is that right?
So 800 calories from your daily protein, just short.
Yeah. If
we're getting 200 grams of protein. So it's not much.
But to get 200 grams of protein, I worked out I have to eat like 800 grams of steak.
Yeah.
That's like 400 gram steaks. Fuck, that's a lot of steak.
Yeah.
I mean, for me.
Yeah.
Because as we get older, it's for some reason, I don't know what the deal is. It seems to be harder to eat as much as I could when I was younger. I don't know what it is. My appetite's not the same.
Absolutely a thing. Yeah.
Maybe my hormonal system's changing and it doesn't make me as hungry or something. I don't know what the deal is.
Yeah, and that's where you can use things like supplements. That's why they're there. So
can we talk about that?
Yeah, so let's use a supplement. Okay, we've identified, Mark, you're struggling to get the protein in. Hey, I'm pretty confident you need to get 2 grams in. So let's just settle on that. Okay, Geordie, I don't want to eat this many steaks as chicken. Okay, well, let's use these supplements and that are there to supplement your diet. Ideally, we're getting whole foods. Yeah, we can all agree. And I'm a big fan, 90-10 rule. I go 90-10. 90% of the time, get it from whole foods.
Get your protein and your fats and your carbs
I
from
say
whole food.
90% of your calories should be from whole foods. 10% be from
supplements.
Well, less favorable foods, I guess. And you might be able to include supplements in there.
Right.
So more processed foods, I would say. And I say 90-10, people go, that's very strict. I go, yeah, you say 90-10, but then people slide down and then it really ends up being about 80-20. And I used to say 80-20 to people, but then people slide and it ends up being 60-40. So 90-10 is a good
80-20, so George, just so I can understand this. So you're saying if I need 180 grams of protein a day, or let's call it 200 just to make the math easy, I should be getting 160 of those grams of 160 grams of that 200 grams of protein from normal food.
If
that's
possible.
80%, and 40 maybe, which is maybe one or 2 protein drinks.
Yeah, if possible.
If possible, yeah.
If possible. Ideally, like in an ideal world, we get it all from whole foods and you don't feel upset in your stomach when you can eat this many steaks, but it's not possible, right? It's not in the realm of reality. That's why you go, okay.
Especially if you're working and stuff.
And if you're a busy guy, you got a life. Like, I don't have a chef at home 24/7. I got to look after the kids. I got to do this. I got to run the businesses. I got to do it. So sometimes, it's a lot easier for me to grab the protein shake than to sit down and cook a medium rare, well-seasoned steak. Yeah. So it's like, let's use the supplements there. So that's what I would say. 2 to 2.5 grams per kilo of protein. I would come down to the carbs and I would say, okay, generally I'd say between 3 to 5 grams per kilogram of your body weight. But within that, make sure you're eating enough complex carbohydrates to get about 30 grams of fiber per day.
Complex being sweet potato or potato.
Quinoa, brown rice, brown bread, the more complex ones that have got the good stuff in there, multigrain bread, things like that, seeds. So you can go through that and then, then we go down to fat. And then we go, because we can work that out then and go, okay, Mark, we're getting 800 calories from the protein. Let's say we're having 400, I don't know, let's say 4 grams per kilo. Let's say we're having 300 grams of carbs. So that's going to work out. We're going to have 4, 8, 12, 1200. So we've got a little bit of
room to move.
We've got a little bit of room. Whatever's left there, we need to put that into your fat.
Yeah.
And so usually that'll work out anywhere from 1 gram, maybe up to 1.5, maybe up to 2 grams per kilogram body weight of fat.
And what are we talking about here? Olive oil, nuts?
Yeah, we're looking at those healthy fats. Like I think in fats, you can get really in the weeds. Don't get me wrong. Like there's a whole science of the different types of fats, and that gets very complicated. But again, you bring this back to basics. If I show you two fats, if I show you a cheeseburger and some olive oil, you can tell me which one's healthy. If I show you some salmon and I show you deep fried, you can tell me which one's healthier. Yeah. So if we can look again, apply that rule 90% of the time, let's try and get these healthy fats over here. And then 10%, yeah, okay, maybe we need to stop at a server and we need to get this because we're just running around between work. Maybe we've got to do that. But 90% of the time, let's try to do it. But that just gives you a structure there where, okay, protein, 2 grams per kilogram, say carbs, anywhere 3 to 4 grams, but making sure we're getting the 30 grams of fiber. And then for fat, anywhere between 1 gram all the way up to 2 grams per kilogram. At least that gives you some structure. So when you're looking at that app, coming back to tracking it, you've got something to measure against. And like we keep saying, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. So let's have a look at where your diet is now. Let's work out these numbers and you go, oh, Geordie, I'm actually eating way too many carbohydrates. And it's not necessarily that carbs are bad, but my protein intake's suffering because of it. Okay, so instead of you going and getting a donut or a croissant, why don't we swap that for some jerky or some other high protein sources? So it gives you some type of structure that then we can measure up against and go, where am I at? And that's the most important step. And that all happens before I come in and write a diet. But once we get to this point and we go, okay, what's your food environment, MB? Where are your numbers at compared to where I think you should be at? Now we can start talking about your diet. Now we can start talking about swaps you can make. Now we can figure out where you're struggling. Oh, I struggle to eat lunchtime because I'm busy. I'm in the office. I've only got access to the cafe downstairs. Okay, well, what are the better options at the cafe? What can we eat at the cafe that better align with these numbers that we've now said? And at the end of all of that, what's your goal with your calories? Do you want to maintain? Do you just want to feel good? Are you trying to lose a bit of weight? Are you trying to put on muscle? That's when we can extend that out to your calories. Where do we want to land at the end of the day with your calories based on whatever your goal is? I want to maintain. I want to lose weight. I want to put on muscle.
So you just talked about something very interesting there about jerky. So I often hear people say to me, keto diet, carnivore diet, and vegan also. We'll just look at vegan in a second, but those first two are sort of somewhat related. Is the keto - carnivore diet, well, keto is slightly different carnivore, but like carnivore, that's just carnivore. It's a bit more extreme. Just meat. Okay. Nothing else. No fruit, no vegetables. They just eat meat. What's the general popular opinion of your industry about the carnivore diet?
Carnivore is interesting because it kind of really got popular within the combat sports community for a while. And again, like there's no long-term studies, right? We don't know if someone, let's get a group of babies, then pop out and let's feed one of them carnivore, one of them Mediterranean. We don't have that data. So conclusively, maybe where I'm sitting, I look at that and I go, oh, when that was really popular, I consulted with a lot of clients that had really high cholesterol, total cholesterol, and really high LDL cholesterol. And when I looked into what they're doing with their diet, they were all following carnivore. And they were eating 8 steaks a day.
Yeah.
They were eating eggs. And they're going, it's not necessarily steak and eggs is bad. But again, if we come back to that structure and we go, okay, let's just say these are the rules that we think work. The good protein, use your carbs to get the fiber, and then let's have the healthy fats. If we're using those rules, where are we getting the fiber from? Where are we getting, you're getting the protein, but you're getting a lot of fat here. Heart disease is a real thing. That's something we definitely dealt with very high level athletes too. I think I probably pulled 15, 20 high level athletes off of a carnivore diet. And then because of their blood work, and this is the other thing, I guess we come back to the start.
In terms of measurement, we didn't do bloods.
In terms of measurement, when we're looking at bloods, that's an important piece because you can have the body composition. And I might be saying, hey, Mark, for you, 12 to 14% is very healthy, but you being at 12% body fat, your blood markers might be terrible. So that says to me as the practitioner, hey, we've got to readjust something. You're either having too little calories, too many. Okay, I'm looking at this. If I'm seeing your cholesterol's through the roof, the first thing I'm looking at is your fat intake. Let's see how we can adjust. And that was something we saw a lot in practice with this carnivore diet, is that we just had ongoing clients with high cholesterol and high LDL cholesterol. And funny enough, when we took them off the carnivore diet, put them back in that structure, hey, let's get some more different sources of fats, those more healthy fats, the more Mediterranean, I guess we'd call fats, get more fiber in their diet, and then periodize their carbs around training, you'd see those bloods correct. but it's just because it's popular opinion, right? And they go, hey, I'll just watch this guy on Instagram. He said it was the best. And it's like and a lot of these guys, this is the other funny point to it, they look good.
Yeah.
They looked really good. Like these guys were shredded. And so from the outside, if we're just using the DEXA as our measurement,
Looks great.
we're going, man, you look pretty good.
But the other measurement should be bloods.
Yeah. And even in the gym, they're performing okay. Like they put in the carbs in around the training, they were doing okay. But then you look at the blood and you go, man, like you're a 25-year-old kid, you're 30. I know right now you don't care, but in 10, 15, 20 years, you will care. Like you need to change this. That's not a good panel to have when you're 25, 30 years old.
What about ketone? What's the difference between that and carnivore?
I think keto is a lot more. I think the carnivore guys is from what I understand of it, at least, is you're just eating meat, right? You're just eating meat. Whereas like keto, I think of what is it, Bulletproof Coffee? I remember being at a cafe.
I remember that.
Yeah. And someone ordering. I literally remember someone ordered a black coffee and they put a stick of butter in there.
And then some MCT oil.
Yeah. That's the one. And I just remember sitting there and they go, do you want one? I went, no, God, no. I do not want one of them. Yeah. I was like, that's like 600 calories just sitting there. And this is the other thing that, like the keto works. Every diet can work if you follow those rules. And I think vegan is the best example of this, which we'll talk about. You can be a very healthy vegan and you can be a very unhealthy vegan. Like if you're sitting there telling me you're eating brownies, ice cream, chocolates, and that's all you're eating in your diet, but they're all vegan, that's not healthy. That to me is not healthy. Like you've got to be hitting these numbers. But coming back, the keto is more, you're just focusing all on the fats and protein. But the big thing with it is they're eliminating carbs. That's the big contingency between them, which again, I understand why people think that. Like logically, if you can sit back and go, our body doesn't need carbs, which it doesn't. In reality, it will function without carbohydrates. But in the same way, like we don't need cars. We don't need trains. We don't need buses.
You want to walk everywhere.
Yeah, if you want to walk everywhere, but God, it makes life a lot easier. And the thing is, where we're at right now with the carbs is if you eat them in the right way, and again, we stick to this 90-10 rule, when you're getting these good complex carbs, and if you train a bit and you use them in the right way, they're very, very healthy.
You said periodized carbs. What do you mean by periodized carbs? Does that mean eat them before you train or eat them after you train? What does it mean?
Yeah, both, I guess. The thing is a lot of people when we do sport, and this is really important, even when I say this, people seem to think I'm just talking about elite athletes, but no, like to me, if you're someone and you get up every day and you go to the gym, whether it be
you're going to Pilates class,
yeah, 45 minutes, 60 minutes, you're getting your heart rate up. To me, you're an athlete. You might not make your money from being an athlete. You're not an elite, but you're still an athlete in the sense
you're
of the
definitely
word.
doing something athletic.
And you need to feel your body. Like you're still going through the same process. Your body is breaking down. It's rebuilding. And if you're doing, like how popular is running now, especially around Sydney, people doing
running clubs,
doing marathons and everything. So if you're going to be running, the average person running a marathon 4 or 5 hours, try to do that without having carbohydrates. Very, very difficult. It's just the way that our body works. Once we hit a certain intensity, our body just prefers to use carbohydrates as a fuel source. And the only reason it prefers that is because it just comes down to the chemistry of it. Fat's just a really big molecule and it does provide a lot of energy. It's a great molecule for energy. Carbs are just smaller and it's very quick to break down. So if I'm running a marathon and I'm really pushing it and I'm going hard.
You're going past zone 2.
You're going zone 3, zone 4. Usually we say at 60-65% of your VO2 max, and just for all purpose sake, VO2 max, just think as hard as I can go until I fall off the treadmill or I stop. So you think of like 60% of that. That's not that hard if you think 60% of that. And if you do the maths for most people, if you've got someone who's got a resting heart rate, 60 beats per minute, say they're a 30-year-old person or whatever, you do the maths and you work out that's 145 beats per minute is about 60-65% of your VO2 max, which if you're wearing a smart device, a Whoop or whatever and tracking that, you go do a zone 2 or low and slow run, you're probably there. Unless you're very fit and you are an athlete and is your job, you're probably there. So what that says is that most of the energy that you're going to be using during that session,
the stuff your body's going to be dragging out.
Yeah, that your body wants to drag out. It doesn't necessarily need it. It can do it with fat. But what your body is looking for is the carbohydrates.
Because it could, just so I understand this, Jordy, so at the point where you're at 60-65% of your VO2 max and like, 145 beats per minute, for example, for a 30-year-old, just gave that example, excuse me, who's at, reasonable fitness, not a particularly, they're not a world stage athlete. you're saying at that point your body says, well, I want to get the smaller molecules, which are the carbs, and not the bigger molecules, which are the fat, in order to produce energy, to complete the mission.
Yeah.
So it's looking for carbs. So if it can't find the carbs, it'll take the fat, but it would prefer to have the carbs. So if that's the case, wouldn't you be better off just to say, I won't take any carbs, or make my body take the fat?
Yeah, you could. That's a huge point that we tried to prove in our sports nutrition, and very, very smart people have spent their whole career going, you know what, logically, if we don't need the carbs, then why don't we just use the fat? And it's called get fat adapted, because our body can use, if we go 60 to 65%, it's not like our body's not using fat and we're not using carbs. It's a curve, and we call it a crossover point. So at the start, at very low intensities, we're using a lot of fat. And then as the intensity goes up, we just prefer to use carbohydrates more. And the reason why our body prefers to use it, it's just called stoichiometry, which is a type of chemistry when we talk about, hey, in our aerobic metabolism, which means if I can breathe oxygen, we need to breathe in oxygen to metabolize these fuel sources. And then we're going to break down that really big fat molecule and get what we call ATP, which is the energy currency of our body. We breathe in oxygen, break down fat, get ATP. We can do that with fat, really low intensity. At about that 60, 65%, our body wants to go over here. The only reason it wants to do it, because if you break down what we call the stoichiometry, which breaks down the maths of how this system works when we're breaking down oxygen, we just get about 5% more of that ATP from carbs over here. And then you might sit there and go, what's 5%? Doesn't make a big deal. And you know what? If I'm being honest, for most people, it doesn't. 5% doesn't make a big deal. But if you're in a 100-meter marathon sprint, you think of an Olympic athlete, what's the difference between first place and second place, gold medal, silver medal at the Olympics and the 100-meter? A lot less than 5%.
Yeah.
What's the difference between the person who gets their hand raised on Saturday at UFC? A lot less than 5%. So when we're talking about these elite level athletes, 5% is huge. 5%, you could make millions and millions of dollars if you came up with a supplement, a tablet, a pill that gave an athlete 5% more of an advantage.
Totally.
You would make so much money. But you can do that if you fuel your body properly. And we see this in a lot of the research where people have had this theory coming back to, why don't I just eat fat and become more fat adapted? And we've tested it where we've put people on and said, hey, just eat a high fat diet. And the best way to think about that is there's enzymes, these things that break down. So if we're talking about that process where we breathe in the oxygen and break down the fats and then the carbs and make ATP, there's little things we call enzymes, which are workers, which are making that happen at every step of the way. So if we eat a high fat diet, we're probably going to have more fat workers and break that down faster. But if we eat more carbs, we've got to break those carbs down. We're going to have more carb workers over here. And we've done studies where, hey, let's just eat more fat and give more workers over here. And this group will have more carbs and we'll give more carb workers. And you know what? We'll make them race each other. And let's see what happens.
What was the outcome?
Every single time, the carbs win.
In terms of performance?
But let's preface this. This is in elite level athletes. The population that this was with was race walkers. So elite level race walkers. I don't know if they have a lot around Bondi getting around. But
no, not really.
It's an intense sport. Like if you watch it, it's like they're going and they're going really hard. But it's one of those sports where the fueling matters. With a lot of sports, especially top end, you're going longer than an hour, it matters. But these carb guys seem to outperform the fat adapted because it does work. We've shown that. If you have these guys on a diet, whether it's 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 8 weeks, they'll get more fat workers and become more fat adapted. So what that does is when we come back to that 60% curve, it actually pushes the curve. So you use more fat for longer. So instead of just crossing over to carbohydrate, you're probably going to be using fat until right up to 80, 90%. But the thing is, if you are truly working up to that 90, 95% of your VO2 max, which is, oh God, this is really, really hard, I'm pushing my body to the limits, we come back to that stoichiometry where it's just basic maths, where if I'm breaking down fat compared to carbohydrate, I'm doing this 5% faster. So even though these guys are very fit, and in this study, they showed both of the participant groups both got fitter by about 8%, so their VO2 max. So they both responded to the training, but when it came to the event, the guys that were fueled on carbs won. And the reason for it is we go, well, they had a 5% advantage. because they were breaking down a fuel source that these guys didn't have.
So what about a non-athlete? What about, just a normal person? I guess the lesson I'm getting out of that is that, Mark, carbs are going to be good. You might train a bit better, a bit harder, but you might skill up a bit better if you're doing something that's training is about skill, or you might improve your times because, you're going to get a bit of an edge. But if you really don't care about that sort of stuff, you're not that competitive, you're just doing training because it's part of your regime, maybe it's better you have less carbs, not no carbs, but less carbs, because you need fiber at the end of the day anyway, and maybe perhaps be more inclined in terms of production of energy, relying on fat.
Yeah, absolutely. And I say that to everyone. They always say to me, oh, you're the sports performance guy. But yeah, there's situations like that where you don't need that many carbs. If you're not Alex Pereira, you're not Dricus Duplessis, Israel Adesanya, you're not these guys that are training 4 or 5 hours, man, you don't need to burn that many.
Yeah.
And so if you're just looking and you're going, okay, man, I just want to feel really good. I want to perform at work. I want to perform in the boardroom. Yeah, but you don't need to go into a board meeting and smash 60 grams of carbohydrates. You're going to feel very sluggish. Total diet. Make sure you're not overeating. Follow that rule set. And then, you're going to get enough energy from those fats where you're going to be really good.
So can I just go back then, Geordie, just for a normal person? So you said 2.2 grams of protein, and the normal person being someone who has an exercise regime, maybe trains every day, maybe one day does weights, next day does aerobic, whatever that is, walking, running, swimming, whatever the case may be. The next day does weights and maybe has a day off a week. Let's say they're doing something 6 days a week, not overtraining. They're not trying to win the Masters, not trying to win the World Championship, whatever. And they work a normal job, and let's assume they sleep okay. So you said 2.2 grams per kilogram of weight in terms of protein.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, that doesn't mean 180 grams of steak. That means you got to eat 800 grams of steak to get 180 grams of protein out of steak, because the general rule, 30 grams of protein per 100 grams of steak, roughly. Something like that, or chicken or fish, they're all probably around about the same. So you got to have that. So then in terms of fat, I think you said 1 to 3 grams per
1 to 2.
1 to 2 grams of fat per kilogram of weight.
Mm-hmm.
And then in terms of carbs, just to perform average, is it 2 to 3?
Yeah, 2 to 4.
2 to 4 grams of fat, but preferably low GI, which is sort of not white potato. It's probably maybe sweet potato and oats.
Yeah,
oats is one
vegetables, things like that. Within that carbohydrates, I always preface it and say, within that carbohydrate limit, get your 30 grams of fiber.
Right, let's talk about hydration. And by the way, one of the things the UFC does very well, and people like you who are working with fighters in the UFC, you do very well, which as opposed to, unfortunately, boxers who don't do this very well, is that it's very easy to cut weight if you don't drink water for 3 days, which, by the way, boxers do that. And that, off the back of that, come massive injuries, especially head injuries. Doesn't take much to get knocked out if you get clipped, because one of the first places to lose hydration is your brain, and one of the last places to rehydrate your brain. That's the fluid between your brain and your skull. First we talk about fighters, but then we just talk just generally how hydration works and how much water do we need. And is it just water, or should we be taking, water with some sort of salts in it? And, there's a lot of people say you should use lemon juice or whatever. If we just talk about fighters now, in terms of hydration, how do you manage not using hydration to lose weight? I know that thing where you drink a whole lot of water for 3-4 days, like 3-4. I'm not talking about that 3-4 liter thing you get everyone to do and then they stop. Just generally, in terms of the earlier weeks in their prep, how do you manage hydration? Do we get it from fruit, or do we get it from drinks, or how do we do it? And how much should we be doing every day?
For the fighters, it's very individual, and it's very individual because what we're trying to do is maintain what we call a state of euhydration, which means hydration. And I guess just going back, hydration is an interesting one because it's a very simple concept in theory. In practice, it's very complicated. And then when you talk about with athletes, it's very convoluted. So even if you just ask someone and say, hey, MB, what does it mean to be hydrated? You probably just go, probably to have enough water. And you go, okay, well, how much is enough? You go, oh, I don't know, 2
How
liters.
do I know when I haven't had enough?
Yeah, well, exactly. And this is the logical thought process, right? And you go, okay, well, let's just start there and let's just go, okay, how do we just baseline? What do these athletes need just as a baseline? What do they need? And you go, okay, well, how do we lose water? We lose water by sweating. Everyone appreciates that. When we go to the bathroom, both ways, we're going to lose fluid through there, but we also lose it throughout the day when we're just breathing. It's a byproduct of our metabolism.
Talking.
We breathe out and doing this. So over the day, you're probably going to naturally lose about two or so liters.
And by the way, that usually calculates on two or three. If it's 2 liters, it's 2 kilos. Of weight,
yeah, exactly.
Body weight.
Yeah, roughly around there. So it should do that. And then the other part to it is, okay, well, what happens if I'm training on top of that? So we can just say, okay, well, 2 liters, your body's about 60 to 70% water. It's not that much out, but it's probably good to put it back in. And let's just focus on that normal before we go into the training. You go normal. We appreciate we're losing water. If I sent you out to the desert, you can only last 4 or 5 days and then you're going to dehydrate and die. So it's a good idea to put that fluid back in. But what are the signs that I need to put this fluid in? And then really what we dwindle this down to, and funny enough, this is 60, 70 years of intense research to come in and go, okay, what measures do we take? And you go, okay, if I'm losing fluid throughout the day, like you said, 1 liter of fluid loss is going to equate to 1 kilo. So you can check your weight. And this is what we do with a lot of our athletes to measure, did you get your hydration right the night before? Did you rehydrate back up? What's your morning weight? And because athletes will appreciate this.
It's again about measurement.
Yeah, measurement. If you don't measure it, you can't manage it. And then even normal people, if you do this and jump on a scale every day, you'll notice these fluctuations.
Well, I weigh myself before I go to bed at night, and I just for fun, I weigh myself when I wake up in the morning. And I might have taken a pee or two. And generally speaking, I've lost a kilo on weight, which means I've lost a litre of water, which means I've got to take a litre back.
Yeah, exactly. So that's our first thing. Let's go, what's your weight
measure
doing?
It.
Yeah, measure it. What's your weight doing? Okay, I've lost it. That gives me a pretty good indication. Does that necessarily mean you're dehydrated? I don't know. Let's look into that a bit more. And then we go, the next thing, what's the next thing your body's going to do to tell you that you need fluid? You're going to feel thirsty. And so there's a whole response, and it's a hormone called vasopressin. You don't need to get into it, but essentially it'll come up and it'll tell your body, okay, anti-diuretic hormone, we call it, so no diuretic P goes up and it tells your body to retain fluid. When that goes up, we go, okay, I'm feeling a bit thirsty. So if you've dropped weight and then you're feeling quite thirsty, we're going to think, okay, that's a good measure. Maybe I'm a little dehydrated. Last piece of the puzzle, it sounds so simple, is the old P chart. But if you go to the toilet and you're urinating and you go, okay, that's quite yellow, then we look at over here and go, yeah, I've lost a bit of weight. I'm quite thirsty. Probably a good indication that you're dehydrated. And people go, it sounds very simple. But I go, okay, but hydration isn't that simple, because let me demonstrate that to you. MB, I give you a litre bottle of water right now. You drink that. You've drank 1 litre. So right now, would you say you're hydrated? You say, yeah, I'm hydrated. Okay, great. We all agree you're hydrated. Okay, MB, I've just fired up the sauna. It's 80 degrees. Jump in there for 40 minutes. So jump in there, you're going to be sweating a lot. Let's say you lose 2 liters of fluid. Let's say 3 liters, 80 degrees. So now you're down. So you've gone up 1 and now we lost 3. Now we're down 2. We jump back out. We measure that. We jumped on the scale. You're down 2 from where you woke up. So are we hydrated? And you go, well, I lost 2. I'm down 2 from where I started. I drank up. And yeah, okay. Now go to the bathroom and pee. But you just drank a litre of fluid before you went in. You held your urine. When you pee, it's going to be clear. So then you go, okay, well, are you hydrated? And see, even though we have these measures, it gets very convoluted. And that's just for the everyday person. And because the way our body holds fluid is not just like we're a big balloon where you can pop it and the fluid will just go everywhere. It holds it in different compartments. Different compartments, like you said, your brain has different priority. The way that we hold fluid in our blood, the way that we shift and move it is very different. So, and this is coming back to why it's so important with the fighters, which we'll talk about later, how you shift that much fluid out. You have to understand this convoluted system of how our body moves fluid around. And then even though we've got all this research that says, hey, you know what? Weight, urine color, and thirst are a very good measurement whether you're dehydrated. It's still, okay, well, we can manipulate that and play around with it. But right now, and it comes back to a very basic thing and why you see so many people in a hospital walk around with a P chart, or why P charts are everywhere. What's the color of your urine? That's usually a pretty good baseline. So even as an absolute at the end of this, we just go, okay, how much do I need to stay hydrated? Enough to keep your urine clear.
clear. And I like your, again, I mean, and I've sort of adopted this as part of my life, but like the measurement process, there's nothing wrong. A set of scales are cheap. If you weigh yourself before you go to bed, weigh yourself in the morning, because I think it's really important for me anyway, if I've lost a kilo of weight overnight and I haven't been to the bathroom, in other words, I haven't taken a crap, I know that whatever I've eaten is in my system, still in my system somewhere, and either in terms of energy, it's in my cells, or it's ready to be excreted. But but outside of that, if I've lost a kilo, it means I've somehow sweated and exhaled a kilo of fluid. I know I need some water. And it's really important to drink water at that time for me. And it doesn't matter whether I'm thirsty or not. I just know from measurement. And I think people, I don't reckon there's anything wrong with being a bit obsessed about this sort of stuff. I mean, I have a set of scales in my office too. And the same set of scales, type of scales that I got at home. So I'm trying to use like for like. And I can do a training session. If I go for a good run, maybe a 50-minute run, and I push a little bit, I can lose 2 kilos. I haven't lost 2 kilos of weight. I've lost 2 kilos of weight, but it's water. It's all water. I haven't lost any fat probably. You're not going to lose that much fat. In that period of time, you have to run a lot longer. Do you see anything wrong with people being not obsessed, but being really aware of measurement processes? So we talked about DEXs, if you want to, find out what you can lose. We've talked about, rested metabolic rate, so that you know what your calorie intake is. So if you want to go on a deficit or want to go to maintenance, we know what that is. We talked about counting calories, not counting calories so much, but knowing how much you eat, relatively speaking. We talked about 2.2 grams of protein and stuff like that. But in terms of hydration, do you think it's important that, I mean, I find it's a pretty simple game, but do you think it's important that people should be looking at their weight and looking at the color of their pee and saying, well, I'm probably a bit dehydrated? Do you think that's important? Outside of athletes, but just
I think
it's
hugely important. There's a doctor called Dr. Stavros Kavaros from Arizona State University. He runs what's called the hydration lab over at Arizona State. Very, very intelligent man. Him, Dr. Lewis James, I've learnt huge amounts of info from them. And what Stavros says in all of his research over the last 10, 15 years has indicated is that if you get just 1% dehydrated, you're going to see negatives to both your mental performance and physical performance. And 1%. So MB,
that's not much.
If you're 80 kilos, 1% is not very much of that. Totally. 800 grams. If you're saying you lose 2 kilos in a training session, it's already over 2%.
And how quickly, if I drink that now, so like how quickly does it take for that water to rehydrate me, so to speak? So like let's say I drink a liter of water. Does it take like 3-4 hours, or is it immediate?
This is a very dicey conversation, very interesting one too, because again, it comes back to that point. Let's use that example when you got up in the morning and then I gave you a liter of fluid and then I put you in the sauna. That bottle of fluid that you put in your body, even though you sat in the sauna for 40 minutes, you can still hold it in your bladder, right? So you can appreciate that within that 40 minutes, that bottle's passed through your body and now it's coming out the other end. But did that water hydrate you? That's the ultimate question, right?
Did it get to your cells?
Did it get to your cells? And this is where the nuance of it comes in. And you go, the short answer is you can hydrate your body pretty quickly, and any fluid will hydrate your body very quickly. The thing is our body isn't just a sack of water. It's a sack of water that has all these different electrolytes floating in there. And the way that our body understands where water is based on the concentration of those electrolytes.
That's really important conversation. So while we're talking about electrolytes, we're talking about sodium, potassium, and magnesium, for example.
Yeah.
Just salts.
Yeah, there's a couple other, but let's focus on, say, sodium and potassium.
Okay.
And that makes it a bit easier for everyone. But here, the thing is that any fluid, no matter what fluid you put in your body, it could be water, it could be coconut water, it could be chocolate milk, it could be a beer, it could be whatever. Eventually, what's going to happen if your body needs it over time, and this is, again, you'll know very quickly, anyone goes to the pub, gets a pint, how long does it take you to break the seal? Very quickly, right? So it's going to move through your body, but did it get to where you need it to be? And that's the conversation, because if you think about the physiology of this, and let's talk about the anatomy, we put the beer, lips, mouth, goes down our esophagus, goes into our stomach, and then it passes into our small intestine. And from our small intestine, and we absorb water all throughout, we absorb a lot of water in our large intestine. Where I've spent a lot of time studying and understanding is this part in your small intestine immediately as it comes out of your stomach. Because when I've got the fighters, this is a very important issue. Because if I've got Israel Adesanya, Kai France, Dan Hooker, Alex Volkanovski, we've got 36 hours. I've dehydrated them, threw them in the sauna like I threw you in the sauna earlier. I've only got 36 hours to rehydrate them. Can I get them fully rehydrated? I need to understand, does that water get back in their system? So in this first part of your small intestine, your body can shuttle water across there into your blood. And your blood is very important because the blood is the highway of the body. The blood is what circulates everything. It circulates your hormones, all your proteins, all of everything. That's how we get water to our cells. But we have a water component of our blood. And when we get dehydrated and when we sweat, people often don't realize that sweat is coming from that space. Not just the blood, the space around it, but just to keep it simple, it's coming from inside your blood, right? So if you're sweating a lot, you're losing a lot of fluid from your blood. And because, say, MB, you got really dehydrated. I was just in Bali. A lot of us got dehydrated. You go to a hospital and you present with dehydration. What are they doing? They're putting an IV in. And why are they putting an IV? Because it's intravenous, because you're getting fluid back into that highway.
So it doesn't have to go back through your stomach. It's quicker and much more efficient. It gets
more efficient because, and that saves millions and millions of lives.
And there's salt in it too. It's not just like pure water.
Exactly. And I guess this is where this conversation leads, because in an ideal world, and this is what they used to do at the UFC, right? They used to really dehydrate these guys. And then instead of drinking their fluid, because that can take a long time, again, all fluid's going to rehydrate you, but we need to get it across that wall into our blood, which depends on two things. It depends on the composition, how much of those electrolytes we have in there, and then how much time you have. That's very, very important. Or you can just go get an IV and put it straight in the source. The problem we have with the UFC fighters is IVs are banned.
Yeah,
IVs are banned.
Technically are in boxing too.
Yeah, technically. I mean, they're technically banned in the UFC too. But the thing is that this guy's going to fight in 36 hours.
Yeah.
Like you said earlier, we need to rehydrate this guy's brain.
Yeah.
We need to he's going to go in there, get punch kicked. I need him to be rehydrated.
Yeah.
So how do we do that? And this is where this conversation comes, where we go, one, let's just appreciate all fluid's going to rehydrate you at some point. So it doesn't matter what you drink. If you put water, coconut water, beer, it's eventually going to do it. My job is I need to do it within 3 hours because I've got other things we need to do too. We've just depleted carbohydrates. We've gotten rid of all these other things. I need to fuel him up. So I need to get this rehydration piece nailed. This is where the science of how many electrolytes and everything do I put in. And it's this little part of your small intestine that's really important for that. So there's a whole class of science called oral rehydration salts. And this was invented years and years ago. And the reason it was invented was for children and people in third world countries that didn't have access to IVs, but were experiencing things like cholera and extreme diarrhea. So if you think in these two situations, people are excreting a lot of fluid, but then there's no way for them to put an IV back into the highway to go round to all the cells and rehydrate them. We have to go through the stomach. But now it's a game of time because they're excreting a lot of fluid, probably faster than what we can drink. We can't afford for you to not get the fluid in that you're drinking. If this is making sense, we need that fluid that you're drinking to get into the highway to go around your body into your cells. And everyone can appreciate if you just have a beer, remember what happens. Most of the time you go to the toilet and you just pee it out. So you need to put in a certain composition of electrolytes if we want to get that fluid back into the highway very, very fast. This is where these oral rehydration salts come in. And it comes back to this point that I made. Our body doesn't understand how much fluid there is in there. It understands the concentration of electrolytes. So for these fighters that
it doesn't recognize it as water, it recognizes it as electrolytes.
For example, say if you're sweating a lot, it will recognize that, hey, the sodium that's in the fluid part of my blood is getting very salty because we've taken fluid out. So it's gotten more concentrated. What that's going to do is cascade a whole bunch of responses in your body. Again, like I said earlier, it's going to cause your body to hold onto water. So then you're not going to go to the bathroom and pee. But again, we want to get that across. But knowing these gradients and knowing these concentrations of, hey, this is how salty your blood is, we can make up hydration drinks, electrolyte drinks to be a certain concentration to work in what we call a concentration gradient. So our body will move things, say, from it's a lot, from an area that is less salty to an area that is really salty to balance it out. And that's essentially the science of what these oral rehydration salts are.
So are you saying then, just talk about a normal person, that they shouldn't, whilst they know that they've got to be hydrated, I mean, I think that's pretty obvious to them, that they should also be thinking about their hydration in terms of having these particular elements, be it sodium, potassium, magnesium, in a drink at least once a day?
Depending. I think it's very over-exaggerated, to be honest. I think the electrolyte companies exaggerate this a lot, and this is coming from someone who makes.
You've got one of your own.
This is coming from someone who sells electrolytes.
I know, right? You do, and it's called Hydrate, and I've used it. And it's very tasty.
And it's but the thing is that we created this product to fix this very particular, and it does work. The reason why, like our product, it's an oral rehydration salt. We don't say, hey, drink it all day, every day, because at the end of the day, for the everyday person, you just having regular fluid, you're not on a time restriction. Even though we're talking about these gradients, you just having water will hydrate your body eventually. It'll just be a lot slower of a process. You'll probably end up peeing a lot of it out. Say if you're someone and you wake up in the morning and MB, you go, I'm down 1 kilo, and you go, I want to make sure that fluid that I put back in, we can then take something like Train Aid that we made and other products like that, which is these oral rehydration salts.
Train Aid, that's the name, yes. And the mango flavor is one I like.
Yeah, and what's going to happen is you're going to push that fluid into that small intestine, and it's going to move very fast into the blood and get into your body's highway.
Especially if you're about to train.
Especially if you're about to train, and if you've just trained and you want to get it back in. Yeah. And if you want to get it back in. So the whole point of this is you need to be thinking about time. If time's not an issue, like you don't need to be doing all of these things. But what we often, and this is a lot of our business clients, a lot of the CEOs, tech guys that we work with, what's their biggest resource? It's time. When I get up in the morning, I get up at 7 a.m. I need to be in the gym by 7:30. I need to be good. So that's why we say, okay, have a product like that where, yeah, you could have plain water. We're just not confident.
Should you have it after or before?
Well, before. And that's knowing that we're going to get that fluid into your system really quick. So it's going to get there physiologically as fast as possible. So then you're going to be hydrated when you get to that training. If you've, like you said, dropped 2 kilos and you want to get that back in as fast as possible, because I've got to go to a meeting at 9 a.m. and I want to be sharp. Stavros's research says just 1% dehydration, you're not going to be as sharp as you can. You're not going to be able to go into your meeting and crush the pitch. Then having something like that afterwards to make sure that fluid gets into the highway back into your cells is going to be really important, because you're time crunched. But if you're not time crunched, just have a glass of water, have a chocolate milk, have whatever. It's going to get there eventually, but you'll probably pee out most of it, but eventually you'll get there. But in the world that a lot of us live in, we don't have that type of time. That's why these type of products are so useful.
Can I just talk about, as we get older, testosterone, it can be an issue, underproduction, relative to what? That's the good question. I mean, I don't really want to talk about the pathology ranges, because I mean, they're just a range, and everybody has a different level of testosterone that's important for themselves. I mean, and I guess you can get these things tested just through blood tests. Are there regimes in terms of nutrition and diet that we should be thinking about in terms of optimizing our ability to produce testosterone? Because I know in America, in the US, you can buy something called DHEA. You can buy it in chemist shops, like you can buy it at airports. Here, I don't think you can buy it. You can get it on a prescription. You can get it made for at a compound chemist if you've got a doctor who can give you a prescription for it. What are the nutritional dietary tips around test and getting enough in there? As a bloke, I'm talking about, and females need too, of course.
So we'll start with the 2 things that I've seen in my practice that plummet your testosterone, and that's too little calories for too long, and then under eating your fat. They're 2 things.
Not enough fat in your diet. So we're not having the 1 to 3 grams per kilogram.
Yeah, if we see, especially with the fighters, when they get really restrictive with their diet, and other athletes as well, because fat's such a big molecule and it contributes a lot of calories, it's an easy one when I need to get under this calorie limit. Let's just wind back on that. It's almost a 2-for-1 trade compared to carbs and fats. So if you get rid of just half the amount of fat, you're at the same position if you got rid of double the carbs or protein.
Wow.
So it's an easy one to wind back calories on. But the consequence of that, and we think that it's around that 0.5 grams per kilogram of body weight, which is exceptionally low. If you go around there and even lower, there's a good chance that you're going to see your testosterone drop down. And then the other thing that we see is that your overall caloric intake, if you go into what we call relative energy deficiency, which is just, doesn't matter where they're from, your overall calories are just low, we're going to see a drop down in that. And the reason we think that is that our body goes in, we say survival mode, but the way I like to think of it is like if you put your iPhone in battery saving mode, what does it do? It stops and shuts off all these background apps that you're not using that aren't absolutely pertinent to that iPhone working. It's going to shut them down. That's how it's going to save energy. Your body does the same thing, and it'll probably sit down and go, hey, you know what? We don't need to have a super huge libido right now. We're not going to be reproducing. Let's wind down on our testosterone. It does other things as well. Thyroid goes down. Iron will often go down. But those two things are big markers that we see. And it's one of the first things we assess with guys. And we go, okay, what's your overall calorie intake like? And what's your fat intake like?
Off the back of a blood test.
Yeah.
Again, blood markers. But let's look at you ask the doctor, the pathology, give you a free testosterone calculation off the back of the amount of test that they actually find, because testosterone is usually bound. A lot of testosterone is bound to another molecule, but you're looking for the stuff that's not bound. And off the back of that, you can then ask a question like, "Hey, Mark, are you eating enough calories? You eating enough fats?" And if for some reason you discover, in the discussion that I'm maybe not, what would your advice to me be then in terms of changing my diet? Mark, you need to eat more fat. You need to eat more calories.
Yeah. We go back to that system here and we go, okay, well, let's just get you up to the higher end of that 1 to 2 grams. Let's at least get you 2 grams. And let's apply this 90-10 principle.
And test again.
And the other thing with testosterone though, and any guys listening to this who have tried to get a prescription have probably abused this, is that it's an acute marker in the sense that it'll change pretty dramatically based on what you do in the days leading up to it. If you have a terrible sleep, if you're very stressed out, if you eat terribly, the stress is a really big one for it. But if you have a terrible night's sleep, it'll just plummet. It'll plummet. And it's not necessarily meaning that you've got low testosterone. It's just at that time you've got low. And this kind of comes to a whole grouping idea with your biomarkers and why we test so often. And we encourage 3 to 6 months, because you can get a snapshot at a moment in time. And you might have just had a stressful week at work. It's really busy. You had heaps of podcasts. You were doing all these things, didn't sleep a lot. And if we took a test on the Friday after that, maybe your testosterone is really low. But then after a week, you went down to the holiday home, you spent time with family, you relaxed, ate some good food. We tested after that, it could be completely different. So this is why getting these tests regularly and understanding what's going on, it's not just a snapshot in time. We start understanding, okay, what's the story of Mark Boris? Yeah. What are his normal measures? What is testosterone? Is a 20 normal for him? So you know what? And he's telling me he's feeling terrible when it dips to 15. Yeah, that's in the normal range, doc. But for Mark, that's low. So we need to do something about it.
That's interesting, because so many people I know, Geordie, who get one blood test a year. And you're right, if it's taken at the wrong time, I mean, even just getting your blood test done at the wrong time of day can have a different result in terms of testosterone. If you get it done at the end of the day as opposed to the beginning of the day, I mean, it's not going to look as good because, your testosterone is higher first thing in the morning because you produce it overnight. And these people who just do it once a year, that's fine. I mean, each to his own. But if you're trying to be the best version of yourself, you have to employ these measurements much more often, and it maybe costs a little bit more money. And fortunately, I'm in a position to do it. But maybe a lot of people are going to say, "Well, that's okay for you, Mark." But I am going to say to them that you need to have more professional involvement. You need to have some form of charting. You need to talk to people like Jordan if you're trying to lose weight or you're trying to be the best version of yourself in terms of diet, etc. You maybe need to talk to an exercise physiologist in terms of what exercises I should be doing relative to the functions I want to perform. You may need to speak to a sleep person to sort of help you out with a sleep strategy as well. And because there's lots of different things, but 3 major things that are non-negotiable in terms of being the best version of yourself for as long as possible is sleep, nutrition, where you come in, and exercise. Those 3. There are other things, community involvement, and blah blah blah. There's lots of other different small, more. But those 3 are the non-negotiables. You can't You can't ever think you're going to be the best version of yourself. And you're telling me in terms of nutrition and where diet comes in is about, we're talking about measurement. Same with sleep. You got to be able to measure sleep too. You know, you need to measure it. I wear one of these, but you know, I got to be careful I don't get obsessed by it. Exercise too, measurement too. It's again, measurement. Am I getting faster? Can I run longer? Am I getting worse? That's fine too. What have I got to do about that? What have I got to, work on? But this all comes down to, and I think people sort of instinctively always know, and it's about, I got to get a good night's sleep. Instinctively, you know that. I know I got to eat properly. Instinctively, I know that. Exercise, I know I got to exercise. But I think the nuance that people like you bring to these environments, and which is what Project 100 is all about, I think one of the most important things is measurement. We know about it, but we don't measure it. We know we should be getting a blood test. We may only get one every 2 years. We know that we shouldn't overeat our calories, but in your case, as you're explaining to me, what does that mean? How many calories is overeating for me relative to anybody else in the world? And you talked about testosterone then. If I get my testosterone tested once a year and it looks okay, but no, that might be just because you've had a 3-week holiday in the Maldives and you're pinging. You're so good right now because the rest of the year when you work your ass off, you're actually low all the time. You're dumping. And you might need to do something about that. And it might be because you don't eat properly, Mark, because you go to work and you sit there all day and you don't have fucking lunch. Or you're starving yourself, which, people like me can do. We forget about we forget about these sorts of things. And I think, Jody, what I'm getting out of this is really important for me, like it's a realization moment, is the importance of, particularly in your discipline, that is nutrition, the food we eat, the diets we live by, not a diet as you find on the internet. I'm talking about what my dietary strategy is one, have a strategy, two, execute on it. And if, like any business, you can't work out how well you're doing unless you measure it from period to period consistently. Would you say that's fair? I mean, you know the whole longevity process. You get it. You read all this stuff. You listen to Andy Galpin, you listen to Human, you listen to Peter T. We all, as a scientist from one of the non-negotiables in living your best life and being your best version of yourself, what have you learnt from what you listen to, watch and read relative to your discipline? What have you learnt? I mean, I'm saying measurement. What have you learnt?
I'd agree. Measurement. I think we do that in every other aspect of our lives. Business is the best example of it. We all have balance sheets.
Well, you're in business and you do it. You run businesses.
Yeah, you have to. And imagine trying to intuitively run a business, or I always say intuitively drive a car or fly a plane. In every other aspect of our life, we have measurements and we have systems. But when it comes to our health, we don't seem to put as much priority to it. And I think that's a consequence of society gets more convenient. Everything that goes along gets more convenience, but health stays the same. Yeah, we might have more convenient apps. We might have meal prep. We might have more access to education. But when it comes to doing the goddamn thing, you've still got to do it, and you've got to have good measurement. You've got to have good system. The thing I've learned over years and years and doing this with thousands and thousands of people is, yes, you can have all the numbers. I can have all these discussions with people like Mark Boris, Andy Galpin, Huberman, all these great, brilliant minds, but none of them are me. And you've got to figure out what works for you. And that's the one thing I've learned over the years, is that everyone is a little different. And don't get me wrong, there are groups of people that you can absolutely bunch together and say, hey, Mark, you're very similar to this person who does this, and et cetera, and your lean mass and testosterone, whatever. And I think this will work for you. But at the end of the day, there's only one Mark Boris, and you need to take full ownership of that. And you need to understand what's the little nuance amongst all this information that applies for me to live my best life and for me to optimize my life. And I think the other part of it is you need to figure out, what does optimize your life mean to you? Because not everyone wants to live to 120. Some people just want to be around for their kids. They want to have enough energy to get through the day. Understanding those things and then creating systems around there and constantly refining it. I've had clients that I've worked with for 7-10 years, where if you look at it from the outset, it's just the same nutrition stuff over and over again. But what we're constantly doing is refining it for them so they can understand their body the best and get the best outcome for them.
So you're saying, Geordie, people got to start taking control, not abrogating control to the universe, not thinking that their doctor, with the greatest respect to doctor, the doctor's got control, because the doctor's there to really to predict or diagnose something as a problem. Doctors aren't there to take control of your general health, like in terms of functionality, what you eat, when you sleep, and all that sort of stuff. So bottom line is the message is take control. Know more about yourself than anybody else. Talk to the experts, listen to the experts, engage with the experts. Follow follow the Fight Dietitian's Instagram. Go onto his website. You want to use some of his products, whatever, but take control for God's sake, instead of just sitting back hoping it's going to be all right, just like our parents did and our grandparents did. This generation, our generation now, there is no fucking excuse. There's scientists like you everywhere telling us every day what to do, and we're reading and we're not taking enough notice of what we're reading. We talk about it to someone else, but then we'll go out and drink, 20 beers and, have a line of cocaine and not eat for 3 days, and then wonder why we're looking for the rope department of Bunnings. So you're fucked. What the hell? I'm serious. Dudes, ladies, let's take control and listen to people. And that's what this show's about, is getting the people like you in to tell us what you've learned. Now, you've been learning this for a million years, and you've seen, as you said, thousands of clients, be they athletes or non-athletes. In 1 hour, we've been able to extract from you what you've learned over your whole career. And that's like gold to us when it comes to diet and nutrition, and explaining things that would take us, even if we could understand it in a scientific sense, we'd have to go to papers. You're reading papers, you talk to Andy Galpin, you swap something. Andy Galpin's he's a bit older than you, he spent a long time putting all this stuff together, and he's probably spoke to a human, and he spoke to a tier, and he spoke to someone else. And then together, there's probably 180 years between all of you of thinking. And it's so easy with the internet. It's so access to, your podcast, people you talk to, your website, your Instagram. I can't believe how easy it is, and yet we don't do it. So bottom line is take control. Thanks very much, mate.
Thanks for having me, MB. Appreciate it.
That was great.